Hello, everyone. John Bodie here. I thought I'd go through a quick strategies for reading now that we're really into the semester. And let me share my screen so I can give you a sense of what we're going to be looking at here. Do, do, do. So the first thing I want to talk about is reading journal articles and theoretical papers. They're really tough sometimes. And the reason that they're tough sometimes is because they weren't written for you to be reading them. They were written for them to pass their comprehensive exams or their dissertation or to get tenure. And so a lot of times they're not really written for the average consumer in college to read them, even though the professor wants you to read them. So what I would suggest you do is start by reading the abstract if they have one, and then go to the back and read the conclusions. See what the paper is concluding. Um, then look at the major and the minor headings. Sometimes the introduction gives you a good sense of where they're going to go. That's kind of their literature review, the review of what's going to be looked at. Look at the methods, the results, the discussion sections sometimes. Um, Read a couple of paragraphs at the beginning of each section. Maybe that'll give you a real good sense of what they're talking about. Look at any diagrams or graphs because that's going to give you some information very visually, which many people really would like to have. And then if you have time or interest, then read the sections completely and take notes on the side even. But don't highlight so much. What I find is that when people highlight, they highlight everything by the time it's done. I would say just highlight very, very specific things that might be important, or maybe even read a section and try to come up with maybe a sentence that really summarizes everything for you. Okay. The next thing that I want to talk about is the theoretical papers. They're even harder sometimes because they a lot of times don't even have sections and headings and major headings and minor headings. If that's the case, then I would suggest reading the conclusion if you can, maybe reading a couple of sentences of each paragraph to get a sense of what they're saying. That might be helpful. Notice bolded words, important terminology, things like that. That might help you to kind of understand the theoretical papers a little bit better. They're very tough to get through. So the next thing I want to talk about is textbooks, reading textbooks. And I really like the oldie but goodie, the SQ3R. The first thing is S is survey, okay? And what I'd like you to do is basically survey the chapter by writing out all of the headings and subheadings in a very hierarchical format. So, one, and then A, B, C, and then two, A, B, C. Now, the reason why I'm asking you to write them out is multimodality learning. You are going to be getting rid of all the text that is getting thrown at you, and you are boiling things down into the major and the minor headings, and you're writing them out, okay? You're trying to get the information to run up your arm and into your brain in a very different way. And that's why you want to write it out. So that's the first thing you do. Now, I know that some textbooks, they have them already written, right under the title sometimes of the chapter. They have it written out. I would say go through it and write it out yourself in hierarchical format so that it's visual this way as well, okay? Because then you're passing the information through your brain in many different ways. Think about it. You're going to write it out. Well, you're going to look at it, and then you're going to write it out in a hierarchical format, right? So that's 3 times already. And then you're going to do a Q, and Q stands for question. And so you're going to take those survey, and you're going to write questions for each of the headings and subheadings. Why, explain, describe, right? Come up with question words just for the headings. Now, you haven't even read it yet, right? But create questions for the survey. Now, that does a number of things. The first thing it does is it passes the information through your brain again, right? Because you've looked at your survey and you've created new questions and then wrote it out. So now that's another 3 times that you've passed the major headings and the minor headings through your brain, and you're creating folders and subfolders in your memory system that you can then put some details into it. Okay, so that's the SQ, and then the 3R is read, recite, and review. Okay, so then you read it. Maybe you take notes a little bit on the side, highlight a little bit. Don't get sucked into highlighting so much, and then recite. So this is a great way of doing feedback. You can go to the lecture then, listen to the lecture and come back. And if you can't answer these questions, right, then you know which sections you have to really read thoroughly to understand, to answer those questions. Okay, so that's a feedback loop in terms of whether you understood the lecture or not. The other thing that it does is if you want to recite, in other words, go and have maybe a study group with friends, this is a great structure. A lot of people complain about study groups that there's no structure and we start talking about our weekends and blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden it's all over, right? And so what this will do is this gives a structure for your study group, because you can go through the headings and subheadings and ask the questions and then talk it over, right? So now you've added not only 6 times, but now you've read it, right? You've read it, and now you're talking it out and asking questions and really, really putting it through your brain in a very different way. And then what I really talk about is review. You want to review probably every other day. Just go through your notes, maybe before your Zoom session, or even if you're having classes in the room. What I would suggest is that you go back, maybe go 10 minutes early and just go through your notes, maybe even talk it out. Because our memory system really, really sucks. Okay, that's our memory. So if this is time and this is the percent recall, what happens, especially if you don't multimodality and reinforce it over and over and over again with different ways of putting it in your brain, basically it goes away very quickly. So this is what I call the cram curve. This is where I was most of my undergraduate. I would study right before the exam, and then it would all go away in my brain. But if you want to really hold on to this, then what you want to do is, maybe in 2 days, when you start to really lose the information, go over it again, right? And it goes back up. And guess what? It goes down slower. And then if in another 2 days, if you go back and review your notes again, then it's going to go down even slower. Okay. So the SQ3R, survey the headings, write them out. Multimodality. That's what you want to be doing. Read it, write it, right? Organize it differently, review, talk it out, put it through your brain in many different ways so that it's really in there, okay? So that's the SQ3R. Now, reading novels and historical readings, it can get a lot because there's so much detail oriented, right? So what I would really suggest is that you maybe even create something like a form that's basically something like character, plot, setting, theme, right? Okay, that way. Because that way you can keep track. Chapter 1, these are the characters, this is the plot, maybe this is the theme that I was watching, okay? So now, that's going to be helpful in really keeping track of the people, of the plot, and of the setting. But it also does something else, right? And so what I'd like you to start to think about is asking questions as you're reading the nonfiction or the biographies, okay? And here's some of the questions. And the reason why is because critical thinking is learning to ask, oh, it disappeared on me, is learning to ask the right questions, right? That's what you want to be doing with critical thinking. And so you have to practice asking the right questions, okay? Setting, it's the time and the place. Don't just write down the time and the place, but when does the story occur? How does the setting affect the story? The plot, what is happening? Why is it happening? Why did the author choose the series of events? And then the characters really understand what would the story be like if the person was deleted? What do the characters say about him or her? Because what you're doing is you're really building a concrete idea, right? These are all concrete. And they're very important because the concrete gives the details that holds up the patterns. Because once you see patterns, right, those patterns flow into the theme, okay? Many of you probably can get the theme and go, oh, this is the theme. And then when the professor says, okay, write a paper on it or talk to me about why you came up with this theme, many students have trouble doing that, right? Because they've gone right to the theme and they haven't really focused on the concreteness of what's going on, okay? For people who are struggling with the theme, this is the way to get at the theme. Be so concrete in your processing of the nonfiction, the biography, that you really understand the concreteness of it, and that will help you and your brain to recognize the patterns that are happening. And those patterns are basically the theme, the message, the thematic key idea that the professor wants to get, or the author wants to get across. Okay, so you're being critical, you're thinking like a critical thinker by asking the right questions, and those right questions in this concrete way will lead you to the theme. Okay, so I hope that this gives you some idea about both reading journal articles, textbooks, and also fiction and nonfiction and historical biographies and all those things. Okay, I hope this was helpful, and be safe out there. Take care.